Order, order. Any chance to move the motion?
Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Do I refer to you as Mr. Speaker in the Mr. Chairman? Do I? Sir Roger. I refer to you as Sir Roger. I'm still learning the ropes. Mr. Chairman, Sir Roger. Thank you very much, and thank you very much to the Minister for coming to answer this debate today. And it is my pleasure to introduce this debate on international climate finance. And I particularly appreciate the presence of a number of colleagues here today, because it is, of course, an extraordinarily busy day in which we are discussing domestic finance with the budget. And I may have one or two words to say on that in a moment. But this is particularly important because we are, of course, in the run-up to COP29, the Conference of the Parties, coming up in Baku. And this is supposed to be the finance COP, the finance conference of the parties, because it is absolutely crucial that we mobilise the finance that is necessary to tackle the climate crisis globally. And my purpose in calling this debate today is to encourage the government to put a little bit more flesh, perhaps, on the warm words that we have heard so far. And I do want to recognise those warm words. For example, the Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, did say that he wanted to put climate change at the centre of foreign policy. That is very welcome to hear. We have heard commitments also from Ed Miliband in terms of investments domestically, but there is still much more to do. And so today I really would like to I'll give the Minister advance notice of the topics that I'd love to have a response from her on. At COP29, we are looking for the international community to agree a new collective quantified goal for climate finance. That goal needs to be in the trillions of dollars, not just the billions. That is the scale of the challenge that we are facing. And I would like to ask the government, do they recognise that? Are they prepared to play their part in leading from the front in order to ensure that there is that collective commitment to the goal? International climate finance needs to tackle mitigation. It needs to tackle the urgent need to invest to reduce emissions of greenhouse gases. It needs to tackle adaptation, because we already have an enormous amount of global warming already built into the climate system due to historic emissions. And it needs to tackle loss and damage, the costs that are already being borne, particularly by those most vulnerable in the poorest countries, due to that historic debt that early industrialising countries have built up through our burning of fossil fuels. Thirdly, I will gladly give way.
Thanks, Sir Roger. One of the biggest factors of debt for some of the low-income countries is debt through private creditors. I think that makes up more than the other debt that a lot of these low-income countries owe. Does she agree with me that addressing debt owed by the debt owed to private creditors is an issue that also needs to be addressed to tackle the need for more funding for climate emergencies?
The member raises a really important point, and of course there has been a history of government, multilateral as well as bilateral efforts to tackle debt crises. There is a role for government to play in regulating the private finance sector in order to prevent effectively vulture finance from preying on countries in this way. There is a key need for international cooperation to address this, because the lenders are from all over the world, and it's crucial that if a country goes through debt relief through one process, that it doesn't then find itself stuck in a debt crisis from another lender. So the honourable member raises a very important point there, and I would be glad to hear from the Minister specifically on her proposals on debt relief. Returning to my list of key topics that I would like to ask about, the third point is that it is essential that international climate finance comes largely in the form of grants, not loans. Now, the UK government has a generally good record. I believe it's roughly 85% of climate finance we have been committing through the form of grants. I believe that commitment is in place up until 2026, if I recall correctly. Can the Minister commit that that will remain a floor and that she will seek to increase it so that the vast majority of climate finance is provided in such a way that it doesn't build up debt repayment problems for the future? I'll gladly give way.
I welcome the point that's being made. It's of course the case that 34 countries in Africa are spending more on debt interest than they are on health and education at the moment. And if we're to talk about a just transition, it's simply not right that the poorest people in the world should be paying for this. So I just want to give force to what the Honourable Lady is saying, and wonder if she would comment more on making sure that it's a just transition.
Absolutely. The Honourable Member raises a very, very important point, and it relates to the point that I was making at the beginning. You know, we cannot avoid the fact that we have a historic responsibility in the UK to take action on climate finance. We need to make sure that we're not storing up further problems in the future by providing climate finance in the form of loans, which makes things harder for those in the poorest people in the poorest countries going forward. And it is frankly a scandal that, as the Honourable Member says, so many people in the poorest countries are finding that their governments are spending more on debt repayments than investing in the crucial health and education investments that builds the what we sometimes call human capital that is so essential for sustainable development within those countries going forward. So I very much hope that the government will lead from the front on this issue in ensuring that climate finance is all, if possible, in the form of grants, or at least the very, very largest proportion of it is. I will happily give way.
Can I congratulate the Honourable Lady for bringing this forward? I spoke to her beforehand, and it is an incredible, important subject. Under the International Climate Finance Report, there have been some 14 programmes initiated to support farmers across the globe to improve their access to clean energy. As the Honourable Lady has rightly said, this is an objective not only of internationally but also domestically at home as well. So does the Honourable Lady agree with me that government must do more to assist farmers domestically across the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland in terms of incentives to encourage them to consider greener?
I thank the Honourable Member for his point, and although this debate is on international climate finance, I am very happy to address the question that he has raised of the interaction between domestic policy and the climate crisis that we face. And indeed, I have to say I was disappointed to hear in the budget, or to not hear in the budget, any commitment to climate or nature. And indeed, reading the detail of the budget, I think page 37 shows that we've got a real terms 2% decrease in the DEFRA budget over the next 2 years. Now, that investment is absolutely crucial because nature-friendly farming in the UK is one of the crucial ways in which we can reduce our own emissions and get a little bit closer to doing our fair share in mitigating climate change. And of course, another issue very close to my own heart, the role of DEFRA in tackling water pollution, which again we are not seeing. So I agree with the Honourable Member that investment domestically in nature-friendly farming and environmental policies is absolutely crucial because, of course, we have got to put our own money where our mouth is. We have got to ensure that we are ourselves on track to meet our climate goals. Now, the stocktake at COP29 last year found that the world is off track to meet the 1.5 degree target, which in itself already commits us to very serious effects. We are seeing, in reality, in real lives, we are seeing increasing droughts, wildfires, increasing frequency and severity of flooding in our own country. We know that climate change is happening. We have to do everything we possibly can domestically to tackle that. My fourth point is that international climate finance must be additional to aid. Now, we've seen in recent years in my view, shameful reduction in the overseas development assistance budget, and I strongly urge the government to bring that up to 0.7% absolutely as soon as possible. But we've also seen the wrapping in of all sorts of other costs within the ODA budget. And there is a real risk if we put international climate finance into the ODA budget. It means there's less money to spend on health and education and all of those other types of policies that are so essential to tackle international poverty and inequality. So international climate finance must be treated separately from ODA. And my fifth point is, where should the money come from? Again, a very important topic on a budget day. Indeed, let me digress slightly into commenting on the budget. One of the policies that we have seen today is a retention of the fuel duty freeze, which is effectively a subsidy for fossil fuels. This is clearly incompatible with the government's rhetoric on climate change. We should lead the way as a country in pushing for polluter pays taxes to generate the finance that is necessary for meeting what I hope will be strong and ambitious international climate finance goals. Because, to recap, this is urgent. 2024 is on track to be the hottest year ever on record. This is only going one way. And I don't know how many economists and how many scientists we need to tell us that the investment must come early, as soon as possible, because transition will get more and more expensive, costly not just financially, but costly in terms of the effects on human lives, the longer we leave it. So COP29 is a crucially important moment in the international climate negotiations. I very much look forward to hearing from the Minister how she will ensure that the UK plays a leading role, putting our own money where our mouth is and doing everything possible to influence international partners to ensure that climate finance is sufficient to address the challenge that we face. Thank you.
The question is that this House has considered COP29 and international climate finance. Annalise Dodds, Minister.
Thank you very much, Sir Roger, and it's a real pleasure to serve in this chamber with you in the chair, and I'm very grateful to the Honourable Member for North Herefordshire for securing this debate and for speaking so powerfully, and I'll do my very best to answer her questions in setting out the Government's approach to this genuinely critical area, which is so important for all of our futures, and particularly that of the poorest people in the world. This Government is getting on with reconnecting Britain to the world and modernising our approach to international development in a spirit of genuine partnership and respect, as I set out in a speech at Chatham House a couple of weeks ago. Now, that speech built on the Foreign Secretary's lecture at Kew Gardens, in which he reiterated our view that action on the climate and nature crisis must be at the heart of everything that we do. And I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady for making reference to that. It's a genuine commitment and an important one. We believe that action on the climate crisis is critical for growing our economy and bringing opportunities to people across our country and globally. We know that our partners around the world share that ambition. And I was very pleased, for example, when I was in Indonesia to sign an agreement on critical minerals with the government there, working on the climate crisis with them and green growth. We have a very strong shared agenda. We need to be really solidifying that partnership globally. Yep, happy to.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. Congratulate the Honourable Lady on securing this important debate. We've heard already the UN has identified £600 billion of additional private finance need if we are going to tackle climate change. Does my honourable friend agree with me that in the UK we're uniquely placed as due to the expertise of the city to lead on this? And does she agree that the UK delegation to COP in Baku must make an ambitious new goal for private investment in the climate a major priority?
Minister. As ever, I agree on every point with my honourable friend, absolutely, and I will, with your permission, Sir Roger, come back to the subject of private finance in a moment, as well as the precise contours of our engagement around leadership in the COP system and more broadly for innovation in this area. But I'm very grateful to him for raising those points. We're very clear that now, when we look at the situations where there's extreme humanitarian need globally, so often this is driven by conflict and by climate crisis, often with the two, in fact, intertwined. And I saw this for myself, unfortunately, in Bentiu, which is a camp for internally displaced people in South Sudan, where people who are escaping the horrific civil war in Sudan are managing to make it to Bentiu IDP camp, but they're surrounded by floodwater, now permanently flooded area, making an already horrendous situation just worse. And we really do need to be recognising the fundamental impact the climate crisis is having right now, and she was absolutely right to underline that. Now, my honourable friend rightly mentioned the COP system. I will come to the climate COP in a moment, but just to mention, of course, Sir Roger, currently the UK team is hard at work at the biodiversity COP that's taking place in Cali, Colombia, COP16, working with partners right around the world, from Indigenous people to the presidency of next year's climate COP, of course the Brazilians as well, so that yes, happy to.
I'm very grateful to her for giving me a second time. I've just returned from Colombia with a delegation from the United Kingdom at the Biodiversity COP, and I can report to her there was huge support from across the world for the definitive action that this government is taking, the leadership that they're showing on nature and biodiversity. So that should give her all the more confidence to make that strong case to those going to Baku as well.
Friend, and it does appear that we are making strong headway on protecting and restoring the wonders of the natural world, both land and sea, including at that COP meeting. But I mention this because, of course, as the Foreign Secretary himself has said, we have to consider nature along with climate when we're facing up to the problems, but also opportunities that arise from this situation. Nature holds so many of the essential, cost-effective solutions that can help us meet many shared goals, including building climate resilience. So it really is important that we're considering both. Now, of course, when it comes to the climate COP, I am very pleased that I will be also heading to Baku alongside the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary. The Prime Minister attended in opposition. He'll be attending in government, and as well as coming forward with our own ambitious nationally determined contribution for the UK at COP29. We are determined to support others to scale up their ambition and action as well. That's including through initiatives like the Global Clean Power Alliance that she may have heard mention of. That's a strong commitment from the new UK government. We're determined to deliver greater political momentum. And she talked about the relationship between domestic and international policy. For the first time, the UK is able to speak with credibility on this because of the actions from the new UK government, saying that we will not be granting new oil and gas licences, stating that we've removed the ban on onshore wind. Other measures like that show that we're not just talking the talk, we're walking the walk, and that's critical when it comes to these kinds of negotiations, to have that credibility. We're also very clear that time and again, when we speak with our friends who are based on small islands and in fragile and vulnerable states, like many of those the UK government was meeting with in Samoa at the CHOGM meeting, what we hear very loudly and clearly is how difficult it is for them to access the finance that they need, especially climate finance. Very little of it actually is getting to those who need it. So the UK is determined to work with our partners to change that, and that's particularly been the case in relation to fragile and conflict-affected states. I've prioritised that, including at the World Bank annuals last week, really trying to make sure we're pushing hard for those sources of climate finance to be available, and indeed sources of adaptation finance. And I was grateful to the Honourable Member for Strangford for mentioning the role of farmers here. If we look at the proportion of climate finance that actually reaches farmers in the most fragile and conflict-affected states, it is minuscule, particularly for adaptation. That's got to change, and change urgently. We believe that we have to increase the level of dedicated climate finance. Absolutely, I would agree with the Honourable Lady, from all sources across the causes and the impacts of the climate crisis. And we, as I said, are determined to make sure that we can agree an ambitious new collective quantified goal. It's absolutely pivotal for negotiations, and it's vital to, of course, maintaining the global consensus of the Paris Agreement and keeping to 1.5 degrees of warming being within our reach. And the UK is working extremely hard on this, from the department I'm based in, Desmond as well, working really closely together, and with our new climate representative and our new nature representative as well. And we've been carrying that forward at every opportunity. Yeah, happy to take her intervention.
Thank you. Might I ask the Minister to put a number on what she's talking about?
Minister.
Well, of course, for that collective quantified goal, it is a collective goal that needs to be agreed. From the UK's point of view, we are determined to exercise leadership around this. I am delighted that we have in Ed Miliband someone who was very engaged in this, of course, 16 years ago, and managed to achieve really great things then. He is working now, as I said, with my department as well, with also our representatives, but with so many contacts from all across the world, to say, right, how can we put forward that overall figure that's needed? It's got to be one that's jointly agreed, as she knows. The most important thing is that we get a figure out of there at the end, because if we don't see those negotiations succeeding, then we really will be taking a step backward when we're in such a situation of urgent need. Yeah, happy to.
Thank you. Might the Minister be able to put a number on what she would consider to be UK leadership financially?
Minister.
Well, as she rightly mentioned previously, the UK has traditionally been a funder in this area, which has focused particularly on the quality of climate finance and making sure that there's sufficient grant and concessional finance. That's something that we're determined to continue to do. But I'll just go back to the fact that it has to be a collectively agreed goal, but she could not see a team that's working harder on this. We really want to make sure that we do get to agreement. There are many forces who, of course, do not want to see, particularly the Global North agreeing with the Global South on this. We believe we can come together. In fact, in the way that at Choghan we saw that global agreement, within the Commonwealth around plastics pollution, we think we need to take that same spirit forward when it comes to this goal too. For our part, as well as co-chairing the Global Green Climate Fund, we're working towards making good on the UK's pledge to get help to those who need it. We want to see robust rules agreed for Article 6 on how countries cooperate to reduce emissions. We need real follow-through from the global stocktake as well on commitments like tripling renewable power and doubling energy efficiency globally by 2030. And we need implementation of the national adaptation plans as well as we scale up finance in support. We've committed £100 million to the Task Force on Access to Climate Finance that the UK co-chairs along with Rwanda, and we're working with the World Bank and the board of the new fund for those facing devastating loss and damage. She was right to mention that as so important. So there's a huge amount to do. A few days ago, as my right honourable friend the Chancellor headed to the IMF, I was at the World Bank in Washington as well, pressing them to shoulder more risks so they can do more to unlock hundreds of billions of dollars and help the poorest and most vulnerable. And that does, to go back to the point mentioned by my honourable friend, have to include unlocking private finance. It's incredibly important. We need to see innovation too. The Honourable Lady quite rightly referred to the fact that we need to be front-loading this funding right now. I think there's very interesting innovation going on with some of the multilateral development banks that we're really pushing them to deliver on, making sure that finance is available as quickly as possible, because now is the time when it comes to mitigation in particular, when we need to be acting. So we are pushing on that. We're championing financial innovation, also including insurance and guarantees as well. And under the new government, the UK has particularly been pushing for climate resilient debt clauses as well. And just to finish on that subject of debt, which I know is of huge concern to so many, my honourable friends for Enfield and Bishop Auckland were right to mention this. We have been pushing, of course, to the G20 process for more action on this. Positive to see Zambia going through that process, but we need to see more action in our view. That's why we are pushing hard on this, also in the Paris Club too, because it can't be acceptable we see such high levels of debt spending rather than on health, education and indeed the kind of issues that we're talking about. Happy to give
Thank the honourable member. I refer back to the figure that the honourable member gave earlier in the debate, the UN's finding that we need £600 billion of international climate finance per year in order to address the challenge that we face. £600 billion investment per year is actually the same amount that is currently invested in oil and gas per year. Would the Minister agree with me that it is time to put a complete end to all public subsidy or support for fossil fuel industries right now? And can she comment on the role that the UK could and should play in putting in place an end to all such subsidies?
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for raising this point, and she may well have heard, in fact, the Chancellor not so very long ago today stating that this new government will be making sure, for example, that what was described as a windfall tax, but what did not operate as a windfall tax on oil and gas companies because of the numerous loopholes, is going to be tightened up under this government, making sure that support for decarbonisation is actually incentivised rather than disincentivised, which was the case with the previous approach to taxation. So big changes taking place currently on this. And just to conclude, Sir Roger, we would be very clear that now is the time for that global action that the Honourable Lady rightly focused on. I met when I was in New York for the UN General Assembly with some representatives from some of those small island developing states which are particularly hard hit by this. They said their slogan used to be 1.5 to stay alive. Now it's becoming 1.5 and we might survive. This really is urgent, and the new UK government is determined to do all we can to exercise leadership on this, working in partnership with others. Thank you.
The question is that this House has considered COP29 and international climate finance. As many of that opinion say aye? Aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. Order, order. Sitting suspended until 4:30.